I'm always so encouraged when I see young people gain a passion for history. So often folks don't acquire that interest until later in life. In fact, my son just turned 39. He's going to be 40 next time. And he's beginning to express interest, and has actually right along, and more questions about our ancestors and what Tumwater was like in the past. So it's always encouraging to me to see that happen. One local historian is rather well known in our local history circles, and we've had him speak here in our History Talk series and consult with him often on a variety of projects. His name is Crooks, and he's over here. It's good to see the joy come through as he talks about his daughter Jennifer, and a lifelong resident of Olympia. We keep tabs on her as she's graduated from St. Martin's University, a BA in history, and then went on to Central Washington University in Ellensburg. And she has got her master's thesis, or have you completed it? You've finished it, yes, I thought so. And so it was on public education in Washington State during World War I and the Red Scare. And so she is an expert at her young age in World War I, their great-grandfather's era, I guess, almost. But she's back home now and making her parents and us proud to see her pursuing her passions for history. And you might have followed her on her articles on Thurston Talk if you go online. In recent months. It's an honor to invite her to the podium and to the big screen today to talk about the very subject that she researched so well back at St. Martin's and CWU. Let's have a warm welcome for Jennifer Crooks.
Sorry. Oh, hello. Thank you for letting me speak here today. I'm very honored. As most of you probably know, it's 2018. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. And this is a picture of the World War I Centennial Commission logo. It's the national group that is working to commemorate World War I. And the war, World War I, had a very important impact upon Europe and the United States. And many historians consider it the most important event of the 20th century, even more than World War I and the Cold War. These are seen as like outgrowths of the effects of World War I. And although far away and isolated from the conflict, Thurston County was not. Thurston County offers an interesting window into how the war affected ordinary Americans. First, I'd like to thank a few people for helping with this project. No project can be done in isolation. My thanks go to the many people who helped make this project possible, including the staff of the Washington State Library, Washington State Archives, as well as my thesis committee at CWU and my advisors at St. Martin's. Most of all, I'd like to thank my parents, Drew and Karen Crooks. They've not only consistently supported me, but have also inspired and assisted me. Official United States involvement in World War I lasted only 18 months, from April 6, 1917 to November 11, 1918. But the war in Europe began in the August of 1914. The conflict was between the Allies, consisting of Great Britain, France, and Russia, and the Central Powers, which are made up of Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. This conflict erupted from long simmering tensions that had divided Europe for decades. The war was sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir apparent of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. This is a picture of him and his family. His wife was also killed as well. A tangled web of treaties brought other powers into the conflict, and fighting soon bogged down in Russia and northern France. Trench warfare and new and old weapons such as the tank, airplane, machine gun, and poisonous gas kept the war in a stalemate that bled Europe dry, killing and wounding millions with no clear end in sight. Far from the battlefields, America was initially officially neutral. This happened for a variety of reasons. The conflict was, of course, a distant one. Americans were deeply divided over the war, additionally, and although many were favorable to the Allies and appalled by German tactics, others were ambivalent. Irish Americans were angered at Britain's indefinite cancellation of home rule in Ireland, while socialists argued that the war was driven by capitalists and bankers. Moreover, over 10 million people of German descent called America home, many within thriving ethnic communities. Most Germans in Thurston County were well integrated into existing communities, and some of them ran important businesses and were active in local politics and society. Germans as a whole in the county were largely accepted and respected. These prominent Germans included artist Edward Lang, immigrating to America in the 1860s and moving to Olympia in 1889. Lang drew communities, businesses, and homes throughout the Pacific Northwest, leaving a valuable record which photographs cannot replicate. And there's a picture of him on the slide. Another important local German was Tumwater's Leopold Schmidt, founder of the Olympia Brewery, in whose house we are meeting today. As the United States drifted closer to intervention in the war, groups, including some in Thurston County, began to advocate for what was termed preparedness, which meant strengthening the military for a potential conflict. Reasons for eventual American involvement in the war are complex. America had closer social, historic, and economic ties with the Allies rather than the Central Powers, including offering billions of loans to the Allies. Moreover, Americans were outraged by a series of deadly incidents, such as the sinking of the Lusitania, as well as German submarine attacks on American shipping. The Zimmermann telegram in January 1917, promising German aid to Mexico for retaking the American Southwest in case America became involved in the European War, as well as the German resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, led to the official declaration of war on April 6, 1917. Thurston County, and there's a picture, a map of it from the newspaper up on the screen, was a pretty different place from what it is today. Residents only numbered about 22,000 individuals, and most were located in the rural parts of the county. It's only about like 7,000 or 8,000 people in like Olympia. Cars were coming in, but they were starting to become common, but they were not that common. Train and ship travel were the best way to get long distances. And the speed limit in downtown Olympia was 12 miles per hour. So, yes. Prior to the war, Thurston County also reflected national ambivalence about the European conflict. Joseph Reeder, a respected grocer of German parentage, was called the von Hindenburg of Olympia for his tenacity in promoting a Chamber of Commerce membership drive in 1915. And this is the title the paper gave him. He didn't pick it himself, evidence seems to suggest. And so they're showing not like super hatred of Germany. Interesting enough, Joseph Reeder, his son, Carl, and then his grandson Joseph later became heads of the Olympia Tumwater Foundation. And Joseph Sr. Was later head of the food administration of Thurston County during the war. So things changed dramatically when America declared war in 1917. Most American opposition quieted as people united to back the war effort. Historians consider this the country's first total war, meaning that almost every aspect of public and private life was encouraged and sometimes coerced to support the country's efforts to win the war. Thurston County businesses sold out of flags in the week after the declaration of the war as families, individuals, businesses, and clubs, as well as offices, got new flags or bought them for the first time. Others flocked to Olympia's Strand Theater to hear Freeman Armstrong, a Canadian veteran, talk about his experiences. As you can see, there's an advertisement on the screen for his talk. He gave it for 2 different days, so people were pretty excited to hear him. Another outlet for this excitement was a major parade on May 1st, or Dewey Day. Dewey Day, which is no longer commemorated, marked Admiral John Dewey's victory at Manila in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. That conflict had been a rallying point for Americans as the country took a more international role. Taking over a month to organize, the Dewey Day Parade involved a long list of organizations such as the Tenino Gun Company and the Home Guard units of Olympia, as well as Home Guard units of different organizations in Tenino, as well as fraternal organizations and their female auxiliaries. Veterans from the Civil and Spanish-American War led the parade. The parade marshal was Frank Kinney, a Spanish-American War veteran who had coined the Olympia Brewery's slogan, "It's the water." And this is a picture of him when he was in the military. The parade was held in the evening, and stores lining the parade route kept their lights on and put up bunting and flags to celebrate the patriotic holiday. Interesting enough, the 4th of July parade, and celebrations which came a few months later, weren't nearly as elaborate as they would have been. They kind of shot their wad planning for this parade. So I'm going to now be talking about individuals, groups, and organizations in the county that supported the government's war efforts. The most important preparedness group in America nationally was the Council of National Defense, which was established by Congress in 1916. It was to coordinate war activities. The Council of Defense system later evolved to reach people at the state, county, and local level. The Washington State Council of Defense, each state had their own Council of Defense, but the Washington one was appointed by the governor in May 1917. A state's Women's Committee was also created at the same time. Local councils of defense also formed at the county level, and they also had female auxiliaries. Female members at all levels of the state were named the Minutewomen, and they were to assist with council activities, and they would end up running the day-to-day bulk of the council's projects. The Thurston County Council of Defense was formed on July 13th. Local councils of defense were also set up, so different little communities like Tenino or Gate would have their own council of defense. Following policy, each council, county and local, had one female member who was the chair of the Women's Work Committee, and she was thus the leader of the Minutewomen in her area. Mrs. Ruby Frome was the head of the Thurston County Minutewomen, but she soon resigned and was replaced by Ada Sprague Mowell. The Minutewomen divided Olympia by ward and precinct, and the rest of the county by school district, so there was a lot of Minutewomen groups all throughout the county, dozens of them. The Thurston County Council of Defense organized war support activities in the county, and this took money. In an attempt to organize the contributions to the confusing array of different drives and war funds that were going on, they established a Central Council of Defense Fund to finance all the drives, except for the Liberty Loan and a few Red Cross drives. They pegged their budget at $2,000 a month and suggested that everyone donate 10 cents per person over 15 per month. Many people donated larger amounts, and the Minutewomen collected these pledges and contributions house to house. However, these funds proved insufficient to pay expenses by fall 1918, so the council planned to create a war chest of $5,000 to meet all requests for funds. However, plans for this was quickly abandoned because of the armistice, and then there was no need for a war chest. Another more unusual group was the Home Guard. These were semi-official militia groups made up of men over draft age or who were otherwise draft exempt, who drilled on evenings and weekends and intended to serve as defense against internal disturbances. The Olympia Home Guard was formed at the Chamber of Commerce on March 31, 1917, a week before the war declaration, and they were later sworn in by Superior Court Judge Mitchell. This group grew to over 40 members. Other organizations formed their own home guards, including fraternal societies such as the Elks and the Knights of Pythias. This was initially quite chaotic and unwieldy, so eventually all the Olympia Home Guard units were consolidated in the summer of 1917. Other communities formed their own Home Guard units, such as Tenino and Yelm. This is a picture of the Yelm Home Guard, and it's actually a very rare image to actually have a picture of a Home Guard unit. I haven't found any other pictures of one in Thurston County. So, some attempts at Home Guard units were more homespun. For example, W.J. Cook, a Tumwater grocer, decided that Thurston County needed a mounted cavalry. Having served in the military caring for horses, he wanted people to loan their horses for drilling and to be a supplemental mounted patrol for the Home Guard. Although he had 30 people attend a meeting in May 1917 at the Tumwater Schoolhouse, no unit was ever formed. The Home Guard continued throughout the entire war, and at times they seemed more like a club than a militia unit. The Olympia Home Guard, for example, held a week-long fair at the lobby, the former Farquhar store that hosted the 1903 state legislature. Still, the Home Guard took itself very seriously. Captain McClarty of the Guard once slugged a drunk young man in the jaw for imitating their drilling. I'm now going to go over I'm now going to go over some major campaigns and programs on the home front. One of perhaps the most famous is the Liberty Loans, or Liberty Bonds, and to a lesser extent, war stamps. Both helped finance the war. Business leaders formed major proponents of the bond sales, and the Minutewomen canvassed house to house. And speakers from the Liberty Loan Committee also visited businesses, especially sawmills and logging camps. Liberty Bond campaigns typically open with much fanfare and excitement. Mass meetings and rallies encourage people to contribute. On Liberty Day, October 31st, 1917, the Minutewomen ward captains lit Liberty bonfires, pun intended, as part of a nationwide celebration. The first bonfire was lit in Washington, D.C. The Skates' contribution to the D.C. fire was a piece of the wooden foundation of the Isaac Stevens home, donated by his son Hazard Stevens. In retrospect, that's kind of a bizarre way to honor a historical figure by burning bits of his house. Later Liberty Bond campaigns were even more strongly promoted, probably because people were becoming weary of buying bonds. There were about 5 Liberty Bond campaigns total over the war. Many groups throughout the county promoted their sale. Businesses and individuals bought bonds and to show their support, and they also sponsored bond advertisements in local newspapers. Businesses sold bonds and stamps at their stores, and groups such as schools and workers formed thrift societies to encourage the purchase of war stamps. County schools participated by assigning students an essay contest in which they were to write about why people should buy bonds. Out of the 1,400 participants in the contest, Mae Wasson, an 8th grader at Tumwater School, won $20 and a bronze medal shaped like a $sign with the inscription, Liberty Loan Essay Prize. Other groups took more unusual steps to promote the sale. 4 Minutemen speakers, the famous speakers that would talk in theaters for the 4 minutes that it took to change reels of film, gave short talks on the Liberty Loan, and led singing at the Olympia movie theaters of sentimental and patriotic songs such as The Long, Long Trail, Love's Old Sweet Song, and America. The Olympia Police Department even offered thrift stamps as reward to children for bringing in stray dogs that were damaging war gardens. The first recipient of the award was a 12-year-old girl named Theda Stokes. She had brought in a big shepherd dog who attacked her puppy and she claimed a 25-cent stamp as a reward. A little too early. However, the bond drives could get nasty when people refused, for whatever reason, to buy bonds, or in the amount the neighbors thought they should. The Rochester Minutewomen made a list of those who didn't buy bonds, and the Minutewomen leader encouraged other communities to do so as well. The public newspapers published slacker lists of people who didn't buy bonds or enough. And sometimes those could get quite descriptive about the people who didn't buy it. Much more was done on a daily basis to encourage people to observe what was called at the time food conservation. During the war, there was a great effort to encourage people to save food for soldiers and shipment to the Allies. This amounted to a voluntary rationing system under the Food Administration led by future President Herbert Hoover. Unlike World War II, people were not issued ration books, but there were laws limiting how much of certain foods people could purchase at a time. Other countries involved in the war did have much stricter rationing, but not in America. A good summary of the food conservation rules comes from a poem by Ruth McDowell, a 6th grader from Olympia's Garfield School. She wrote, quote, "Don't eat this and don't eat that. Try to get thin instead of fat. Hoover says to save all we can. Do this, it will help some soldier man. Whether we're short or whether we're tall, will help the soldiers one and all. Corn can be used instead of wheat. Fish can be used instead of meat. If we waste, we'll help the Huns. So of corn, we'll make our buns. We can eat rice and crisp corn flakes, and use less sugar in our cakes. If we do all this without a grunt, we'll help the soldiers at the front." And as you can see, this is a poster encouraging people to limit their consumption of certain things, of wheat, meat, fat, and sugar, and to use other things, because these are things that are that are needed in Europe. The Minutemen were active in getting people to pledge to obey food conservation rules. The first food pledge campaign began in late October 1917. The campaign met with an initially enthusiastic response from both the community and the Minutewomen, but was ultimately a failure in getting people to sign up. Further campaigns in Thurston County succeeded in signing up more people, but it never included everyone, and nor is it possible to quantify how well these rules were obeyed. However, a lot of work was done to conserve food. Many people participated by planting war gardens. The Olympia Chamber of Commerce even listed vacant lots available for farming. This was pretty successful, but police had to issue warnings for children to keep off the new gardens where they used to play baseball. Other groups helped popularize food conservation rules. School children were encouraged to grow gardens and join canning clubs. These clubs held public demonstrations about food conservation, and these were usually well attended. The Red Cross was another important group during the war. They provided support for soldiers and allied civilians, tending to the sick and wounded. The Red Cross was formed in Thurston County in February 1917 and had auxiliaries throughout the area and at local schools. Church women's groups and clubs all helped the group, and the Minutewomen assisted the Red Cross in collecting for membership drives and projects. The Red Cross also sewed and knit for soldiers and rolled bandages for the wounded. Over the months of the war, the Red Cross held many drives, but by far the largest and most important Red Cross drive was their Christmas membership drive. This campaign began in mid-December 1917, and this is an advertisement for it. As you can see, their slogan is, "Every man, woman, and child in Thurston County a member of the Red Cross." And indeed, most people ended up joining. The Minutewomen assisted in this drive by collecting memberships. The Red Cross also used other types of events to raise money. The Schmidt family lent the Tumwater Club for free and provided free apple juice. At one typical dance, over 200 couples danced in the flag-bedecked hall on April 19, 1917. Other dances for soldiers would be held in the hall, as well as in the Central Hall in Olympia. One of these dances promised, quote, the wildest time of your life, and a biggest surprise every 10 minutes, without elaborating on what that surprise was. So this is a picture of the Tumwater Hall, which was located nearby to where we are now. And this is an advertisement, kind of almost like a modern Coca-Cola advertisement for apple juice, which was produced by the Northwest Fruit Products Company, which was owned by the Schmidts, and they made fruit juices after statewide prohibition. The Red Cross also produced many items for soldiers. They knitted socks, sweaters, and mittens. They sewed hospital gowns and donated used clothes for refugees. They made towels out of rags. They gathered moss in the woods to make bandages. They even took over a courtroom in the newly built Temple of Justice, dubbing it the Moss Room, and rolled bandages there for a time. Some items went to the base hospital at Camp Lewis, and they even had 2 sheep grazing on the state capitol lawn, which is now the SBI office, to raise wool. The newspaper celebrated people who contributed a lot, including one old woman, Mrs. Robert Prickman, who knitted 73 sweaters for the Red Cross. Perhaps the most tangled history of the World War era in Thurston County is the shipyards. Olympia had 2 shipyards at the time. They've often been seen as either a failure or success, and the truth is very complicated. While the county has had a strong maritime connection, being right on the Puget Sound, commercial shipbuilding hasn't really been a viable local industry. Other cities such as Aberdeen and Tacoma ended up being much better and more prominent locations for shipbuilding. In 1916, seeing increased wartime demand as an opportunity, local investors created the Olympia Shipbuilding Company in September, and its first keel was laid later that month. They built their yards in what is now the Port of Olympia. The company was part of the Aberdeen's Grays Harbor Shipbuilding Company. Another shipbuilding company, the Sloan Shipbuilding Company, also set up a shipyard nearby in January 1917. This firm had plants up and down the West Coast. Neither company, Olympia or Sloan, would long survive the war. They did not build warships, but wooden auxiliary vessels. Sloan had a contract with the government for several ships, while the Olympia Company contracted with a Norwegian company to build cargo ships. Both shipyards initially seemed to prosper and employed hundreds of people. Sloan went through a period of rapid expansion, driving piles for new slips to build ships in June 1917. It even purchased the capital city ironworks and had local architect Joseph Wollop design an expansion. Sloan even felt confident to promise a 7% annual bonus for all workers. The Olympia Shipbuilding Company also expanded, building temporary offices designed by Wollop and leasing a dock from the Olympia Oyster Company to build ships. People celebrated the shipyards as a patriotic duty. Mrs. Kate Young of Little Rock was proud to sell a 27-inch ship knee to them. She said, quote, I feel that every timber I contribute toward the making of an American ship is just one more blow delivered in the cause of my country toward the making of an American ship. Cause of my country at this time of supreme need. End quote. Ship launches were widely attended, even when they happened at odd hours, such as 5 in the morning. At the launch of Olympia's shipyard's first ship, the Wergeland, in July 1917, thousands watched the ship out of the ways. The company hosted a banquet at the Elks Club for the ship's crew and its owner, C.J. Brock of Trondheim. Over 200 people attended the banquet. The governor Ernst Lister was invited but unable to come. The Wergeland went on a maiden voyage to Sydney, Australia, with a load of timber from Port Blakely, taking along a ship mascot and captain's companion, a stray dog rescued from Olympia's pound. In total, the Olympia Company yards built 3 ships, including the Wergelin, General Pershing, and Corsanis. All these ships were completed in Tacoma and received by their respective owners. Sloan was contracted for 7 ships, but built 4: the Kulcha, Kathina, Chalaba, and Kulbura. None of their original owners would get these ships. However, despite how proud civic leaders were of their city's yards, the veneer of financial solvency and harmony was very thin. In mid-October 1917, all but 4 watchmen at Olympia's shipbuilding company walked off the job. They cited several grievances for this action. The plant manager had recently declared that paydays would move to the 5th and 20th of the month, with 5 days' pay held back, rather than having payday once per week. In addition, they would discontinue double pay on Saturdays. The manager argued that these changes would save time and money in the office. The response to these radical changes, workers went on strike. However, the regular bowling games between businesses continued unabated, and some work was continued on the ships. The strike lasted several months, and there were also later strikes. The Olympia Shipbuilding Company also experiences strikes, as well as claims of fraud, delays in production, and false insolvency claims. Both shipyards would soon close after the war. The Olympia Shipbuilding Company was dissolved in July 1920. Sloan's ships at its yards in Olympia and Anacortes were seized by the federal government in 1917 in December. And the federal government alleged that Sloan had committed fraud and mismanagement. After much litigation, the Sloan Company closed, and their ships were sold as scrap. All machinery and quality wood removed. The 4 ships in Olympia were sold to a junk dealer for $1, dismantled and burned in 1920. Many people in Thurston County feared spying and sabotage, especially from German Americans. Local historian Gordon Newell once wrote that, quote, "In Olympia, as in the nation as a whole, the World War I years became a glorious opportunity for busybodies, snoopers, frustrated fascists, and the self-righteous to bask in the glow of patriotism and approval." And people panicked about a plane seen by farmers on Bush Prairie whose occupants sang "My Old Kentucky Home." Others panicked about a grumpy man working a radio at Priest Point Park, across from the shipyards. However, most of the anger and fear was directed at German Americans. German Americans had been an important part of the county's population, and prior to the war, they were the largest white ethnic minority in the Pacific Northwest. At the beginning of the war, many were quick to defend the German Americans from criticism and suspicion. Announcing that the city would begin to record gun and ammunition sales, Olympia Mayor Mills assured the public that, quote, "There is no cause of worry in Olympia. We have a number of German-born citizens here who are loyal to the flag. They may regret that the United States is at war with Germany, but they are Americans clear down the line and will make a lot of native-born Americans ashamed of themselves before the war is over. They are mighty good, patriotic citizens," end quote. However, these tides of anti-Germanism were much too strong for even brave people to fight. It also affected schools. German was a popular language to study nationwide and was the top foreign language to study in Washington high schools. Arguing that school administrators were tolerating teachers' pro-German, pacifist, or un-American ideas, nativists made language an issue over widespread concerns that teachers were sometimes promoting pro-German attitudes. It can be seen in this political cartoon from Cincinnati, showing soldiers on the front while children at home are studying German textbooks that say the fatherland, hooray for the Kaiser, and Germany overall. These concerns over potential disloyalty cause increasing scrutiny for teachers and textbooks, particularly for German language instructors, whether they were German or not, and also for German teachers of German heritage. Washington was late in its movement to banning German, but it was comparatively moderate compared to other states where they actually had people attack German Americans. There were different incidents of German pastors being beaten up, and there was actually one lynching of one German American in another state. Similar incidents of violence were very rare in Washington, but in April 1918, the Washington State Board of Education passed a resolution that German could remain an elective in high school for preparedness reasons only, for possible overseas service, so long as the teachers were loyal and supported the American war effort. However, by August of the same year, the state board requested that all schools ban German instruction completely. These tensions also affected other teachers. Charles R. Carr had worked for Thurston County Schools since 1908, teaching at South Bay and nearby McLean. A Christian pacifist and a socialist, he was accused in 1918 by his school board of being disloyal to the United States and the war effort. After the board fired him, then reinstated him, and then fired him again, the Thurston County Council of Defense appealed to the Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction to rule on Carr's case. They had three main charges against the teacher: that he had called the war unholy, unrighteous, and wholly for commercial purposes at a Liberty Bond meeting, as well as telling a few men that he would not assist in shipbuilding and other war activities, as well as discouraging students from selling, buying, or writing essays about the Second Liberty Loan. At a hearing before a superintendent of public instruction, Josephine Corliss Preston, held in the Senate chamber of the state capitol Olympia, which is now the SBI building, though they've lost the clock tower in a fire. Carr defended himself at this hearing, and he had a lawyer. He argued that he only meant the war had a commercial origin, not that America had a commercial interest for joining the war, and that he was interested in helping in the home front, but not in killing. His pastor defended him, arguing that Carr was a pacifist and not disloyal. Several members of the audience of the Liberty Loan meeting testified. The court swore in several of Carr's students, but they were aged about 8 to 10, but the children didn't testify and just played around at the speaker's desk the entire time. So, a local woman from South Bay brought a petition from district residents, over 250 of them who attended the hearing, claiming that the real issue was a conflict between Carr and the principal, not over his patriotism, and that Carr was an excellent teacher and should be reinstated. Preston, however, revoked Carr's teaching license, arguing that his un-American and unpatriotic remarks were deplorable and unprofessional. At first, Carr tried to appeal to the State Board of Education, but he dropped his appeal in June. He later moved to Idaho for work, where, struggling with depression, he committed suicide in 1922. During the war, numerous women were strong supporters of the war effort. Take, for example, the Thurston County Council of Defense's female group, the Minutewomen of Thurston County. They helped with Liberty loans, food conservation, and other jobs. Perhaps their most unusual project was participating in the baby weighing project of the Children's Year, which was a project put on by the Children's Bureau of the State Department, the National Department of Labor, believing that since many young men would die in the war, it'd be good to try to lower childhood mortality rates in the country, which were the highest in the Western and developed world at the time. And so they wanted to encourage child welfare. This included a project to weigh and measure young children to gain knowledge of national health. Oh, too soon. Across the nation, 5 million children were examined by thousands of volunteers in over 16,000 communities. The Thurston County Minutemen asked that children ages 5 and under come to the Olympia Chamber of Commerce at times assigned by Ward. After the first day of tests, the newspaper noted with pleasure that the children were overall healthy. The end of World War I in November 1918 caught the county at a pause. Homefront groups in Thurston County had canceled meetings when the town banned all public gatherings during the deadly flu pandemic, and the war ended before the ban is lifted. This is a picture of people in Seattle taking precautions against the flu pandemic by wearing masks in public. The flu pandemic was very deadly. It's hard to get accurate data for like how many people died in the area, but Seattle had several thousand people die of the flu, and it hit Thurston County very hard, and nearby Camp Lewis especially hard. Across America, people celebrated the armistice a little early on November 7th because of misleading information. Thurston County was no exception. Olympia and other communities responded with cheers. Flu masks were thrown off, and there was an impromptu band concert of makeshift instruments, an official demonstration in Sylvester Park, which was then known as Capitol Park. The real armistice on November 11th was celebrated, but a bit anticlimactic. But the World War I home front was soon passing into history. Sometimes lost in the story of the home front are those who served in the military. World War I was an incredibly costly war, although American casualties were only a tiny fraction of the overall numbers killed, wounded, missing, or held prisoner. Many Americans enlisted in the early days of the conflict, while others were drafted. The first draft contingents received much fanfare. The State House provided cars to ferry the 56 men from the Thurston County Courthouse to Camp Lewis. The Home Guard paraded and presented arms as they left. The Red Cross even packed them lunches. Later draft contingents were not nearly so celebrated or lucky. The county had close ties to Camp Lewis, which was built in 1916. It's now known as Joint Base Lewis-McChord. The construction of the post in Pierce County employed thousands of laborers and was an economic boon to local farmers. The Thurston County Dairy and Farm Products Association, for example, sold massive amounts of milk and vegetables to Camp Lewis, including hundreds of gallons of ice cream. Soldiers often visited Camp Olympia on leave from Camp Lewis. Military police accompanied these weekend excursions. The Chamber of Commerce offered dormitories to soldiers and arranged for them to have dinners at private homes, especially on Thanksgiving. The Olympia Public Library increased its hours so that they could attend, and the YMCA also held an open house with music and games. The Red Cross hosted dances at the Tumwater Club, as well as the Central Hall and Masonic Lodge. There was way too many people to fit into one building. For their part, soldiers seemed to like Thurston County. One soldier patient said to his doctor at Camp Lewis that, quote, "Sir, the Olympia people know how to put the hospital into hospitality," end quote. At least he was only sick from overeating and not from food poisoning. People were quite generous to the visitors. Prior to official American intervention in the war, some county people had served with the Allies. When the war broke out, several German reservists tried and failed to obey orders to return to Germany to rejoin their units, but were stopped by the British blockade of Germany. These included Ernst Glasser, nephew of Leopold Schmidt of the Tumwater Brewing Company, in whose house we are in today. However, Ernst Glasser later joined the National Guard, served in the conflict in Mexico in 1916, became an American citizen, and tried but failed to actually fight with the American military in the war. He couldn't because he was a German citizen. Although there are no official statistics for the number of soldiers in Thurston County who died in the conflict, I've calculated that it's around 20. Some had enlisted in the military of Allied nations before the war, for America joined the war, rather. These included Robert Banner of Alberta, son of former resident Joshua Banner, who was killed in the war. Joseph Collins in Little Rock enlisted in Canada as well, and he was poison gassed and spent 6 months at an English hospital before returning home, and died a few years later from the after effects of that. These are pictures of some of the people killed in the war from Thurston County. They're from a book called Soldiers of the Great War. It was a book published in 1920. It's available online and well as in other libraries. That people sent in pictures of their relatives who were killed in the war, and there's ones for every state. Olympia in the county named many of its veterans organizations for people killed in World War I. Olympia's American Legion named themselves for William Leach, a graduate of Olympia High School. This is his picture and the original 1920s Legion Hall. Legion Way is also named for them, as well as the trees planted along Legion Way are also a memorial to veterans. The Veterans of Foreign Wars post took their name from Ira Cater, who was also an OHS graduate. Leach was buried in France, but Cater's body was returned to his family and is buried in Tumwater's Masonic Cemetery. During this war, the United States tried to repatriate a lot of the bodies upon family request to the United States. In World War II, this was too expensive and was very disorganized, but there are American cemeteries for World War I people in Europe, of course, where Leach is buried. Tenino's American Legion was named itself for William Mullaney, who had died of heart complications from shell shock and was buried in Tenino. This is a picture of their hall. In many ways, Thurston County and the United States after World War I were very different places from what they had been before the war. Perhaps some innocence was lost for many people. Foreign Minutewomen leader Mrs. Ada Sprague Mowell seemed to believe so. Quote, "Into the midst of our busy life," Mrs. Mowell reflected decades later, "came World War I, and overnight everything changed. Olympia went all out for war work, Red Cross work, Minutewomen, Council of Defense, etc. When it was over, life had changed and never quite resumed its old tenor." End quote. As the World War I centennial occurs during an era of increasing political tension and debate over what it means to be an American, looking back at 1917 and 1918 offers some parallels and lessons. The question remains, just what lessons are we going to learn? Thank you for coming, and is there any questions I can answer at this time? Yes?
I'm reading a book on the history of the German General Staff.
Mm-hmm.
And this information around the 1500s up to the war in Versailles is very interesting and correlation. And about that time after the Versailles, the Germans still didn't want to give up the Versailles Treaty. You probably know that. Mm-hmm. But they kept going on, and there's a lot of correlation with and how the development of that happened in World War II. And there's a much correlation between and the evolution of this, you know. And it was history. I'm not for the alt-right. It was just history that I got interested in. But there is a lot of correlation with history in this, and I appreciate that, those names. I can't pronounce those names, but I appreciate it.
Yes?
Were there any nurses, women who were nurses from our area in the war, or did you have that information?
I've done a little research on that, but I think so, yes. I know there were definitely some nurses that, there was like nurses who served at the hospital in Fort Lewis, and then also in Seattle, there was a few. Yes?
Do you know why the Americans changed their mind about coming into the World War I when they did? Because prior to then, they hadn't been very interested in being involved in that conflict. So do you know why they decided to come in and fight in that war?
Well, there were many reasons, and it kind of built up over time. Big reasons included like German attacks on American shipping. America was a big shipper of goods, and as well as more popular reasons. So people were getting upset about like the sinking of the Lusitania, where thousands of people were killed, including a few hundred Americans. And the Zimmerman telegram, where Germany promised aid for retaking the American Southwest to Mexico if America involved. So some people thought that was a fake, but others definitely thought it was real. And so they felt that Germany was more of a threat to them and that they needed to get involved.
There was sinking of the ships too, weren't there?
Yeah, a lot of ships were sunk.
A lot of Americans lost their lives in those U-boat. That was the first part of the submarine.
Yes. You? Yes?
I just find it interesting that the war bonds and all the efforts that were made. Today, all the wars that we've been in since World War II, we don't pay any attention. It doesn't affect the civilian. We don't go out and have gardens. We don't buy war bonds. We don't do any of the things that the other wars, I won't say charged us with doing, but inspired us to say, hey, we got to get our bodies into it too. It's not just let a few people at the top fight for us.
Yeah. Yes, these wars were definitely very different from recent wars. And you?
So did Bremerton build boats? Was the naval shipyard there in operation during that time?
Yeah, the naval yard was there. I don't know if they built boats, but
Tacoma boat.
yes.
Tacoma boat was a big shipyard that built a lot of Navy ships.
Yeah, they were.
I don't know if they're still
No.
in.
I don't
Tacoma
know.
boat was a big shipbuilder of the military.
Yeah. The Olympia companies had their ships finished in Tacoma during the war. So. Yes.
You know, in the woods, the government and the mill owners used the war to destroy all the unions. Did the same thing happen in the mills here, or you mentioned the strike? Was that just a kind of spontaneous thing, or was there a union organization behind it?
For the shipyard strikes,
Yeah.
they did have a union, several unions, and that they were the ones organizing the strike. And in the mills and the companies didn't like the unions, of course, but yeah.
Because in the woods, they went out actively and just destroyed all the unions and created the Yellow Dog Union. And I just wondered if they tried to do a similar thing in the towns, where they weren't isolated, they didn't have the political means to do it.
I'm not sure. I don't think they had quite the motivation to do it, and the companies went out pretty quickly.
Great. All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. I think this is her largest crowd she's ever spoken to. It is great. So we're so proud of her. Don't forget, we have little flyers out here now. We've replenished our stock of our new flyers for our tours of the Schmidt House, for one thing. Bob Krim does those, and next Tuesday will be the next one, so we do need to get you to phone in or email us so you can get reserved for those house tours. And then in 2 weeks, we'll have another talking about the focus on the state capitol building, legislative building. So I hope you come back for that. So thank you so much for coming. You packed out the house again, and we thought when we expanded the schedule we would reduce the size of each crowd, but it hasn't happened. All right. Well, thank you for coming.